Good evening. The opinions and statements voiced by our guests do not necessarily reflect the opinions of this network. Enjoy the shows.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk only on Paranormal Experience Radio. Broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Listening to the Full Spectrum Project. I am your host, Brian Clune, and I am joined by my co-host.
How you doing, y'all? This is Pete Haviland down here in this great state of Texas. Glad y'all are here with us tonight.
And we are also joined by Angie Mole, who will be back with us in a little bit for our Weird World News segment.
Hey, y'all.
Today we are going to be speaking with Gian J. Quasar, and we're going to be speaking about Amelia Earhart, a little bit about her life and what a lot of people say is a mysterious disappearance. Before we get into that, though, something I thought was a little bit interesting a couple days ago. My wife and I were kind of cruising around Hollywood, and she had never been to the Westwood Memorial Cemetery. Now, the last time I was there was to take a picture of Marilyn Monroe's, it's not really a headstone, it's kind of a mausoleum square. And the last time I was there, it was just covered in lipstick, lip marks, and was just completely pink. Now, when we were there a couple days ago, it turns out that Hugh Hefner is now right next to Marilyn Monroe. And I thought it was rather funny. There was one lipstick mark on Marilyn's grave, but on Hugh Hefner's were like hundreds of lipstick marks. His little placard is now more pink than Marilyn's. And I was wondering if Marilyn might not be kind of popping out and kissing all over Hef. She
was the first centerfold for Playboy. So who knows?
Yeah.
Then again, who knows? Maybe you took out your royal pink and you did that.
Or maybe I was kissing all over Hef too.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
You know, I mean,
you know how weird you are.
Who'd want Marilyn? I mean, really?
Yeah.
Anyway, John, my apologies for that. I thought Pete would kind of get a kick out of that, possibly you too.
Yeah, that was cool.
All right, so before we get into the topic of Miss Earhart, we'd like our listeners to get to know you a little bit. You've been described as both the most under-advertised investigator of the unexplained and also the most influential. Can you tell us about yourself and how that dichotomy came about?
It's probably because I learned how to speak like a geek, so I'm influential with the academic world more and with the production level more than perhaps people who follow the subject matter casually. So I've been influential with, because I change, I don't go with the narrative. I investigate a subject matter in order to find the truth of it, not just to add another issue to the mystery, something like that, another issue to the narrative.
So, in other words, what you're saying is when you go in to investigate, you're not trying to investigate the things that everybody else investigates, the things that are in your face. You try and delve a little bit more deeply into what is occurring rather than what everybody knows.
I don't repeat the narrative that goes on. So looking back in history at where some of these mysteries begin, I take a different pathway to the present, and it's often very the subject matter is very different, whether from the popular, perception of it, whether it's Bigfoot or UFOs or missing people or true crime cases. An awful lot that's out there is simply hearsay and a legend that keeps being regurgitated, but really doesn't have a basis in fact.
Gotcha. So also you've been called the real life Kolchak.
I have. That's one of the nice things I've been called.
Yeah.
I can identify with that. I've been called some doozies over the years.
Yeah. So for those that are unfamiliar with the show, it was a 1970s show called the Night Stalker, and Kolchak was a reporter who investigated strange, evil, occult happenings. So how you kind of explained that you were kind of that was one of the nicer monikers that you have, but how do you feel about that, and how did you get that nickname?
Kolchak actually started as two made-for-TV movies. The Las Vegas one was after the Vampire, 1972, and it's a big success. And then it had a sequel, of course, and then the series. And that was the prototype for the X-Files, which most people out there would identify with. They would have heard of the X-Files. And so that's basically what I ended up doing. I look at mysteries that are intriguing, that perhaps many people have heard about, some who haven't. And I, am just as amazed sometimes to encounter some very bizarre things as he did. And so I thought it was a great compliment to be someone who takes a serious approach at topics that are sometimes written off or dismissed as folklore or paranormal, and no one really gives it a serious look. They just continue to repeat this legend that has little foundation. So I thought that was quite a compliment. It was a southern reporter that called me that. Another one of your rivals put her on to me, and then she called me real life Kolchak, and then I liked that.
Yeah, I can think of worse things.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's a cool name. The show was great. And I love Kolchak. I wish they would. Yeah. And I wish they did more than the one season.
Yeah, they made up for it with X-Files. How long was that on?
Yeah,
too long.
No, too long. Come on.
Well, X-Files was cool, but then after a while, it sort of kind of jumped the shark. It started doing things where kind of like, oh, wait a minute, what? You know what I mean? It just kind of, I don't know whether the writers got bored or they just ran out of ideas, but it seemed like that show just sort of, I don't know. That could just be me, of course.
I thought it was really cool. I think was it the last season they did an homage to Kolchak, and brought in that character. That I guess he ended up being an alien or something, but he dressed exactly like Kolchak. It was like one of the last shows on the last season, I think.
That light seersucker suit.
Yeah, and the hat,
See, I don't remember that at all. I remember Kolchak, but I don't remember the character in the X-Files.
It was the last. I think it was like it was either season 11 or season 12. It was like one of the last ones that and one of the last shows of either one of those seasons. Yeah, they did an homage to Kolchak. It was actually pretty cool.
I might have to check that out.
Yeah,
doing it in real life ruins the entertainment for you. Because you have to suspend disbelief too much when you start watching the shows.
Yeah, that's we've talked about that quite a bit on the show here. That once you start investigating and doing this in real life, the shows do tend to get a little bit like you're looking at them going, no. So yeah, I think we all get that one.
They're not intuitive enough on the shows. In real life, you become intuitive in what you're doing.
Yeah, I guess that's a nice way of saying it. I think I would have said it different, but we won't go into that. All right, so we've talked a lot on this show about how paranormal investigators seem to be drawn to true crime. And it seems you also have an interest in that. And I believe in your case, it's specifically serial killers. Was this your first interest, or did the paranormal kind of lead you to the hunt for these human predators?
No, my first interest was the Bermuda Triangle, because I'm more of an adventurer at heart. Something like the old days of adventure and going out, looking for a mystery, like something Jason and the Argonauts. I consider that to be the ultimate adventure, finding that kind of stuff. And so places far away, exotic, with an ambiance of mystery, and that attracted me to the Triangle over 30 years ago. And so that's what I became known for, unfortunately, because I documented it more than anybody, and that was really not my intent, but I started that in 1990, 30 years ago now. And for 9 years, I did that intensely and then put up a website in 1999, and I was number one on Alta Vista and all those when they existed in the first week, and television knocked down my door because no one had seen this kind of information. After that, I got to do all this TV. It had been a subject matter that was dead for 20 years by that time, and people thought it was debunked. And then I had shown how there were, over 100 disappearances people never heard about. And I got it all with official reports and audio of a Mayday and a weird object, and report pages in which pilots vanished, when the tower controller was watching and the plane vanished while landing. And so that's what skyrocketed me to a rather dubious distinction. No one investigated the Triangle. And so I never encountered any trouble. I was the Triangle guy on all this radio and TV. My book was published by McGraw-Hill in a few years. Tom Cruise even optioned the book, his production company, in 2004.
Wow.
And, I was left alone in the world of the Triangle, and a lot of people wouldn't even cover it because they had their own preconceived ideas from 25 years before. But I had no competition, so there was nothing to get in fights over with others. And then when I started sticking my nose into other subjects, which I had been, but simply not been putting up, websites or anything, then people were saying that wasn't my subject matter. They didn't like someone doing that kind of intensive research. I was told to get out of Bigfoot. I was trying in 2010 I'd written 4 or 5 books by that time. I switched to finally trying to find out the truth about Jack the Ripper. That's what started me, was that case. And then, of course, the Zodiac, since I'm close enough, I could go to all the locations. And I got bogged down then with a very local crime, which a lot of people hadn't heard about except a core group that continued to drumbeat it online, but we're not documenting it very well. And that was the East Area Rapists. That's D'Angelo's now pled guilty to all that. And so in 2014, I started putting up a website of all my investigation. I went to find all the locations, and we're talking about 65, 70 crimes all over California. I had to go to those places. And so I basically, then got all this attention for that. I had 50, 60,000 people coming in from one Reddit link alone, and they're still pouring into my site today because he's being faced with all the people who he raped and everything, and they're confronting him in court right now. And so that's a huge section of my website, and I basically made it a very famous case. And I even got welcomed in 2 jurisdictions investigating would look at any of my persons of interest that I would submit any of my data. I was treated very well by the district attorney's office in Orange County and the sheriffs up here in Sacramento County. And so now I'm back to finishing Zodiac. My book has been delayed because of fear of lawsuits. I can name the guy. I got his printing, and I had to put up a reminder on my website why Horoscope is delayed. And it's a lot of politics right now, but eventually there's going to be a circus I don't want to be involved in.
Yeah, I don't blame you with that one.
Following that, there's all the updates are on my website. You can look at some of the printing You can look at blog posts. I don't do my blog much anymore, but there's still some old posts there of information I got, and I build up the ambiance. But the book has been delayed for a few years now. It's 95,000 words. It's all done.
Well, what is some of the misinformation on Zodiac that you can share with us?
There's a lot on Zodiac.
Okay.
That he was a master criminal. He was very premeditative in some things, but he really left quite a trail behind him of clues and mistakes. Mm-hmm. But they built him up into being this astrological assassin. There are those who turned him into a real-life comic strip. They wanted to believe some of his letters where he was going to continue to commit all these murders.
Right.
And just not brag about them anymore. So they think, that all these murders in the country since then be the result of Zodiac. That simply is not true. He quit after he killed Stein.
Okay.
And he bragged about all the stuff for a few years and then stopped. And that's what makes him far more mysterious. He was very arrogant. He dabbled at crime, a complete motive, not necessarily certain, but he isn't the great master villain that he is.
Well, I know Pete and I had actually talked about possibly having you come back on the show for a whole discussion on the Zodiac and the Zodiac murders and things like that. But since I have you on, just real quick, I know we're supposed to be talking about Amelia Earhart, but I have found a possible, and I'm saying possible, connection with the Zodiac and a killing down in the San Diego area. And I want to say Mission Beach, but I'm not sure that's the right area. Ocean Beach.
Ocean Beach, yeah.
What do you think about that connection?
Johnny Ray and Joyce swindle, wasn't it? Yeah, I've written about it. It's very suggestive in some accounts. So is the Gaviota Beach murders, also with a 22. That occurred.
Okay.
Gaviota occurred on June 3, 1963. The swindles was February. Was right around Valentine's Day.
Okay.
And they never were able to make a connection back then. And now, of course, they want to make a connection with that other Oceanside shooting of the cab driver.
Mm-hmm.
And then the guy threatened to kill a bus driver. And they never found out why he did that. He dumped the cab driver's body behind the house of the current mayor of Oceanside, and it was in an alley, so it was also behind the house of the former mayor of Oceanside. So this guy was obviously into terrorizing the powers that be. This was, 1962, April 62? So it was before them all.
Yeah. Right.
Got him with the 22. And there's elements that suggest Zodiac, but I would have to tell you it's very unlikely. I would like it to be him, so you get the guy, you also solve those.
Right.
But for one of those, I can place my guy who he matches and everything. So Steve certainly could not have done the swindles because he was in the Air Force training academy at that time before they booted him out under psychiatric condition.
Okay.
And he was in basic training, so he could not have left to go to San Diego for the swindles.
Okay.
Gotcha.
All right. Well, for the Gaviota murders and for the 1962.
Okay. So we're going to have to take a station identification break, and when we come back, we'll continue speaking with Gian Quasar and get to know him and Amelia Earhart a little bit better. So we'll see you when we get back.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, Birmingham, Alabama.
Oh, come on. I'm Southern, but... nope. That'll do. Hello, I am Kat Hobson, host of Paranormal Experience here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. I enjoy having guests from all areas of the paranormal, from ghosts to ufology to cryptids and beyond. You'll find some of the best researchers in their fields bringing you some great information. Join me on Wednesday nights from 8 to 10 p. Eastern here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting. The best in paranormal talk radio.
Listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experienced Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Since 1948, Fate Magazine has brought you reports of the strange and unknown, all of them true. Fate Radio is carrying on that tradition, bringing you the unusual, macabre, strange, and bizarre. Join host Kat Hobson Sunday nights from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern on WBHM Digital Broadcasting. You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experience Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
The time is 23 minutes after the hour.
Okay, so we are back from our station identification break, and we are talking with Gian J. Quasar. So, John, I had one more question in regards to our listeners to getting to know you. You're known as an investigative historian. What differentiates a historian from an investigative historian, and are the tools and methods basically the same, or do you incorporate different types of tools that say, somebody who is strictly in it for the history without, investigating the deeper meaning? How does that work?
A historian would be someone who chronicles. An investigative historian is someone who uncovers.
So how do you go about?
So you're looking for something, an investigative, you're putting things together in history. You're looking for something. An investigative historian, it's toward a purpose. As we were talking about in the break about another subject, I have to go back decades to uncover the actual facts. And as we were talking about cattle mutilations, so that we, otherwise those are so generalized out there that you really don't know where they begin and what the details are. So that would be, looking back in past and investigating your investigative historian. Yeah. So it's kind of like, historical detective work.
Gotcha.
Cold case, but not a murder involved.
Now, see, that sounds like something that Pete would really get into.
Yeah, I'm working a cold case right now from 1989.
So,
yeah. Cold case is very rewarding because, if you get the guy, you're actually doing quite an accomplishment. You're bringing a creep to book over stuff he did to people.
Yeah, I was actually supposed to help out on that. I've been a little lax in it, but I'll get to it, Pete.
No, I was going to say where I'm at with the cold case that I'm working at right now is that I pretty much know who did it. It's just a gathering of putting them there and proving it. That's been the bugger.
Yeah. Okay, so we have you on today to talk about the mystery surrounding Amelia Earhart. So, what first drew you to look into this legendary aviatrix?
Too much contradictions were being reported about her, and it starts with Fred Gerner's classic book, The Search for Amelia Earhart, which was an enormous bestseller in 1966. And he pioneered the search for her again. He was with CBS Radio in San Francisco. And it was just the right time when everybody was very interested in Amelia Earhart. A couple of guys in the Air Force were part of their own Operation Earhart. And people wanted to find out what really happened to her. You know, the rumors were around that did the Japanese get her? Was she taken as a prisoner? Instead, there was Josephine Akiyama in San Mateo, who was a dental assistant on Saipan, and she got in the news in 1960 in the local San Mateo paper, saying that she saw her executed. And that is the jumping off point in which so many people then followed, and Gerner wrote his book, and they all jumped off from Akiyama's statement that she saw this plane go down in the harbor. The Japanese were all around it. They brought these two people, and she thought one was a girl. Took them out in the forest, and she heard the firing squad. And everyone who investigated it thereafter completely discounted Akiyama's account and took it to a lot of levels of conspiracy. And so I got very curious, what is the truth here? Because you can't have both. You cannot have an eyewitness like Akiyama as a little girl saying she saw this, and then further investigation by Fred Gerner and CBS for 6 years in the 1960s, uncovering, the Saipan story, in the jail, this other stuff, and then Joe Gervais, who was one of the Air Force officers, uncovering information that she might have been taken off to Japan. And it escalated so much, but no one ever solved it. Gerner ended up believing initially that her bones were found and dug up at the end of the war, and they're in a drawer at the National Archives. Because of all these conspiracy reasons, they could not admit it, as she and Fred Gerner had been on a spy mission, that big popular theory. Joe Gervais really, he was actually a good investigator. He talked to all these people who are still alive in her family. He got to talk to people who knew her. He uncovered so many documents, and he's the one who then went off as a loose cannon and proposed that she was still alive and in New Jersey, Irene Bolam. And that was, he wrote Amelia Earhart Lives, and that was taken out in 7 weeks because Irene Bolam filed a lawsuit against McGraw-Hill for that.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're talking decades of people continuing to add to this legend of Amelia Earhart, and I got very curious, just what is the evidence here? Because officially they'll say, she went down off Howland Island, she ran out of gas, and that's all there is to it. There's no more to be said. But there's a lot of ambiguities involved. There's reports that she was overheard on the radio after. And so I had to look into all of it. Just my point with my book, which is entitled Then Came the Dawn. It's the search for Amelia Earhart. It's the biography of Amelia Earhart's search, really. It's not a biography of her. So it is to put into one volume for everybody out there what is really viable and what is not. So they have the entire mystery of her disappearance and the theories. It's not an indiscriminate collection of theories. If it's not tenable, I'm going to say so. I'm not ridiculing anybody. I don't have time for that, but it is. Some theories are simply not necessary, and maybe others are. And so I just lay it out for the reader, and they can then come to their own conclusion. Because as I said before, to solve Amelia Earhart, you have to find the plane on the bottom of the ocean,
right,
or identify her body.
Right.
And I don't have the finances to go, do that with a ship and try and find her plane. So I'm left to try and clean up the mystery for everybody else, because that is essential to actually directing any real search, is to find out what the actual facts are.
Wasn't there, I think I sent this to you in Messenger, that there was something about bones being found and sent off, and then they became
Sent an
lost.
email,
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, an email.
That's a real old story.
Okay.
That one of the missionaries to Nicomaroro, Gardner Island, found these bones and didn't know about it, and it got a little political for the British. The governor in Suva wanted to bypass the medical expert in Tarawa, and so he told him, send the bones straight to me. But for some reason, when the ship set in at Tarawa, the doctor heard there was a parcel of bones in there and automatically assumed it was for him, so he took them. And it really caused a stink with the British minister in that area that he was intercepted. And they didn't pursue it after that. The doctor on Tarawa, who may not have been the best medical doctor there was, said that these bones were of a native male.
Okay.
And so that ended it, and the doctor wouldn't elaborate to him why these bones were so important. There's communiques with this doctor in Tarawa asking why was this considered so important, and the governor in Suva Island refused to tell him. It was between he and the missionary on Gardner. And in any case, those are the bones that were found again on Tarawa. Now I've heard tell they're supposedly a European man's, and now they're supposedly a woman's. But the original diagnosis was that they were there for a long time, at least 20 years on the beach.
Wow.
Gardner, and could have been from an old shipwreck. There was mariner type of stuff found around the bones.
Okay.
And so this is what people are making us think of, the Bob Ballard investigation. Tigers, we've heard of Tiger for 30 years.
Yeah.
That's their theory, Rick Gillespie's.
Okay.
And I don't know what it's based on. They have come up with different, got to be careful now, different angles to reignite interest in Nicomaroro, including the possibility of a 1938 photo taken by Bevington.
Now, that was the one that's the one that showed up, last year that they made a documentary out of?
That showed what they said was the undercarriage, the wheel sticking up undercarriage of a plane close to the old shipwreck.
Yeah. That's the one.
And
that's the one.
that simply is not believable.
I was thinking of the one that the picture that showed up of Amelia, supposedly Amelia, and
that
Fred
one on the dock.
Yeah, on the dock.
Yeah,
with
the person's
with
dressed
the ship.
like one of the workers.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, I thought you meant the Bevington photo from 1938.
No. I got the two confused. Yeah, I got the two confused.
And so that they try and say is where the Electra crashed. She crash landed in the shallows there. When the tide's out, that's land. It's a big stretch of beach.
Right.
And the truth of it is that Lambrecht, the Navy pilot from the battleship Colorado, went down to 400 feet. A week after she disappeared, he scoured those islands.
Okay.
He notes that he saw the ship and its broken back down there. That was the wreck of the something city, castle, or whatever it was. Norwich, city of Norwich, 1929. He noticed the ship. Now, this wrecked airplane wing and undercarriage of the wheel is supposed to be nearby, according to the Bevington photo. In 1938, well, Lambrecht would have seen the silhouette of a plane or anything on that shallow area, and he reports nothing. He said there was signs of recent habitation on Gardner, but no one was there, and he gunned his engine. He went down to 400 feet. They were taking pictures, and this is a week after she had vanished, and no one's there. And that kind of does end it. There had been a habitation there before. The guano farmers moved there to, and then there was a colony there in 1938, 1940, sometime when they found the bones. And so, of course, they're going to find period piece stuff after that.
Okay. Well, what about the testimony from some of the people on the island that claimed that either they saw her in a prison or they saw her being taken off, and they heard that she had been executed? Is there any truth to that?
Well, that's Saipan. That's the site
Okay.
there. That's
Yeah.
a long
Okay.
way
I'm
from,
sorry.
That's
Okay.
totally different from Nicomororo. Nicomororo would be Rick Gillespie's theory in Tiger. So Saipan
Okay.
goes back to Akiyama. That's the very first.
Okay.
And that's the one that Fred Gerner followed up, and then Joe Gervais. And
Okay.
basically what convinced everybody of that was the testimony of the islanders, that
Okay.
there was a European woman on the island before the war, and she was a pilot, apparently, because they were shocked to see her wear man's clothes, and she came from the plane.
Okay.
And she was billeted at the hotel in Garapan.
Mm-hmm.
And then the stories changed drastically, whether she was executed or died naturally. More or less, it's that she died naturally.
Okay.
And that was enough. And he was executed, supposedly the man with her. He was injured, had a head injury.
Okay.
But as more, that ignited everybody in the 1960s, and it was the right environment. Again, people were nostalgic about the war, and they would believe the Japanese were capable of doing anything like that. But as more information has come out over the decades, it's obvious that the Japanese knew exactly who she was. They'd even offered to search for her as a courtesy, which they did.
Okay.
Even Emperor Hirohito's brother was very interested in meeting her. He was quite interested in this whole affair. So he talked to his brother about it. And so there's no way that a military governor on Saipan had any authority to execute anybody without orders from Tokyo, and they never would have done that to Amelia Earhart. So what it comes down to is that maybe the military governor was stupid enough he didn't know who he had, or she died soon thereafter because of exposure. No one really knows what the time period is between crashing, if that's what she did, and then being found and then taken to Saipan. And maybe then they didn't know what to do about it.
Okay.
And so it gets hushed up. I am not saying that's my theory, but the idea she was executed in 1937 is rubbish. No Japanese governor would have done that. They had no power.
Okay.
The thing is that convinces more people is that there's information on the Marshall Islands, which came forward during the war.
Okay.
That she was there, that a woman pilot was there before the war.
Okay.
And she was taken away. And the Marshallese believe that fervently. They even struck up stamps showing the Electra being hauled off by the Japanese ship, and the caption reads, "Rescued, not captured." So they issued formal stamps. And the story comes from a Japanese trader, Ajima, who was a man named Eliu, who was held in very high esteem, who then told U.S. officers, intelligence officers that he worked with during the war after the liberation, and those are the ones that Fred Gerner found, Commander Bogan and a couple of others, and they confirmed that was true, that they believed Earhart had been on the Marshall Islands. And that even rated a news article in 1944, a brief one, that Earhart was believed to have been on the island. And so there's only one logical explanation. If you believe she was on the Marshall Islands, then they would have taken her to Saipan, which was the administrative center. But if that's the case, why is there no indisputable proof? Why only natives saying that they saw this woman who they identified with Earhart?
Well, what are your thoughts on all of this? I mean, what are your theories?
Well, cutting to the chase too quickly.
Okay, well, I'll tell you what. Well, let's step back.
There's just so many theories about, about the plane, and you get so many people involved who insist they saw this, that, and the other thing, and they don't put it in context. All these books about how the islanders weren't always necessarily identifying Earhart, except by when being led, being shown pictures. They're starting out with her fuel for one, and the radio reports. She was being heard, loud and clear at Howland at the time of her fuel exhaustion. So this suggested she was just passing Howland and that she had to ditch shortly thereafter. So how did she get to the Marshall Islands, which are 800 miles northwest? It's not possible. So when people start arguing it, they're going to argue, how did she possibly, you're going to have to say that she survived the ditching, they were in a raft, and then she got picked up by a Japanese fishing boat, who then, which is intimated in that Ajima's statement, that when Eliu said, this Japanese trader during the war had said he was talking to sailors, and that she came down near this Alinglap atoll, but it's confused. It could be that he was by that atoll, he heard from seamen that they picked her up or something, and that's what gets pushed around. She came down to the Marshall Islands. So in order to believe she got to the Marshall Islands, you have to believe a Japanese ship, a fishing ship, was out there and picked her up at sea and then took her to the Marshall Islands. And they were so dumb they didn't know who they had, perhaps, and that's why they didn't report it right away, because they were told, Tokyo was informed during the search, so it's not like any military official would have been ignorant as to who this was.
Yeah, and you would have to think that they probably knew about her flight, because it wasn't exactly, kept a secret that Amelia Earhart was going around trying to fly around the world. So they should have been at least aware that she was going to be in that area.
Absolutely. Actually, Tokyo was supposed to be one of her destinations on her original flight before she wrecked the plane.
Was that when she was supposed to be heading west instead of east?
Heading the other direction. And they had, she'd wanted to midair refuel and then maybe make Tokyo. So I don't think the Japanese on the whole would have been ignorant as to who she was. That was always the basis of the conspiracy, that they didn't know who she was and that the military commander had her executed, which he didn't even have the authority to do. And now they found out, the communiques going back and forth, that the emperor's brother was quite involved and wanted to find her.
It might have been.
You have to compromise in order to keep every aspect of the facts of Eliu, who was reliable on the Marshall Islands, of the Japanese trader Ajima told him, and what the naval officers heard and the marine officers heard right soon after the liberation in 1944. So if it's all accurate, then she did get to the Marshall Islands.
Right.
So then the only way she could have done so was to have been picked up by a Japanese fishing vessel. And they, of course, would have been ignorant. They might not have known who she was.
Yeah, I mean,
they're
it's
just
possible.
fishermen out there.
Yeah. All right. Well, we have to take another station identification break. We are speaking with Gian J. Quasar. And when we come back, I want to kind of get into maybe talking about who Amelia Earhart was for those who aren't really familiar. So we'll be back in just a couple minutes.
You're listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experience Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Oh, come on. I'm Southern, but... Nope. That'll do. Hello. I am Kat Hobson, host of Paranormal Experience here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. I enjoy having guests from all areas of the paranormal, from ghosts to ufology to cryptids and beyond. You'll find some of the best researchers in their fields bringing you some great information. Join me on Wednesday nights from 8 to 10 p. Eastern here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
Since 1948, Fate Magazine has brought you reports of the strange and unknown, all of them true. Fate Radio is carrying on that tradition, bringing you the unusual, macabre, strange, and bizarre. Join host Kat Hobson Sunday nights from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
Listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experienced Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
And we are back with the Full Spectrum Project, and we are talking to Gian J. Quasar. John is okay?
Correct.
Okay.
John is correct. Yes.
All right. About Amelia Earhart. So, John, for those members of our audience who aren't really familiar with Amelia Earhart, I kind of wanted to get into a little bit, about her early life and how she might have gotten into aviation. And one of the things that I thought was kind of interesting was that her mother was from an affluent family. Her father was a lawyer for one of the railroads. Did the family have money before Amelia's father began, I guess, drinking it all away?
They were what we would call fancy poor. Her mother was Amy Otis and descended of James Otis of the Revolution, and had prosperous people, but her father, the Earhart side, wasn't so prosperous. And so fancy poor, born in, Kansas, Atchison, wasn't it? And she was raised by her mother to be very independent, her and her sister. She was the leader of the two, and she was a tomboy, and developed a very stubborn streak when she was young, but she read and had a mind of her own, and she grew from there. And then she was part of that lost generation, kind of, with World War I. She didn't know what to do afterwards. She had joined the nursing corps to go up Canada and nurse guys coming back. She was trying to discover herself still, and after that she had an intense, for instance, since she was young, she said this to herself, she got intense pleasure from physical exercise. She was someone who was very much into a thrill, intense pleasure from that. And that's kind of what she sought out.
So you were saying that she kind of started off, not started off, I think that's the wrong way to put it, but she kind of grew up as a tomboy. Did that happen after her father started drinking heavily? And I know because of that, I guess the family moved around a lot. Do you think that whole thing with her father drinking, their lack of money, had anything to do with Amelia developing this kind of lust for adventure?
No, at that time I wouldn't say they had a lack of money. Even in Los Angeles, they still had the annuity. She actually was so poor in business, she got her mother to invest in a gypsum mine, and that's what ruined them. And then she didn't even have the appearance of being fancy poor. She lost her Hollywood friends. She had to go into a trucking business with a buddy, and that just did not suit the Hollywood friends that she had at that time. But she didn't care. She was going to do something to make money, and business was booming. So I would say, there was, fancy poor always, but there was that money there. There was that ability to do more than, she didn't have to go do these small jobs, anything like that. So I wouldn't say the father really did not have authority over the mother's inheritance and the annuity. The drinking would have caused other problems, but I don't think that really completely was the problem with money. But certainly she had gotten used to, the comfortable lifestyle, and she didn't like that when that was lost, and she was always trying to get that back. And she found a way of doing that, hopefully. It was never her intent, but when she took up flying in 20, whatever, she went to take a flying lesson from Nita Snook.
Mm-hmm. When she was in Los Angeles?
Yeah, in Long Beach. She was this dainty little thing, well-bred, obviously, as Nita recalled, and not the Earhart we would picture, looking like a guy and dressing like a man, but very dainty thing in the slouch hat and all the fashion of the time. And that's when her career begins. And she was a very charismatic woman. She had a way of kind of getting around paying Snook for her lessons, and she was just very charming. And she, instead of paying Snook, she bought one of the airplanes from the field's owner. He was developing them. Kinner was his name. So she bought a Kinner Airster, and that was good advertisement for the Long Beach airfield. And her ability and her charm got her in with the fashion crowd. It was a big thing to fly at that time, so everybody had to look like they were flying, and DeMille was into all this, and she would go to the derbies, and she would stunt and do all kinds of flying with Alois McClintock, who was quite a star during the silent era. And so she was well known locally for the derby scene.
So her
local celebrity.
She kind of it was after she came to well, I guess her family moved out here, but during World War I, you said she had become like a nurse's, if I remember correctly, a nurse's aide in Toronto.
Yeah, she was in Canada.
Yeah,
her sister was there.
And then after the war, she enrolled in Columbia as pre-med. And I'm just kind of wondering, since she was taking care of most likely Canadians who had...
That was after Los Angeles that she
that was after Los Angeles?
Oh, yeah. That's when she lost all the money in the gypsum mine. Her friend was there, and they went to go visit the mine and saw him drown. The mine was ruined by a flood, and that ruined them. And she couldn't afford to fly anymore. She had to sell her plane. She had sinus problems. She needed surgery, and instead of paying for that, she took her yellow car, her little Kissel, I guess it was, the Yellow Peril, she called it, and her mom drove back to Medford, where the sister was, and that she left Los Angeles and any chance of making it at flying. She couldn't. She was lousy in business. She couldn't broker herself into anything steady to make money. This was all performing. She set a record for height in 1922. She got written up favorably. The stars knew who she was, but she wasn't material beyond that. And so that's when she decided she had to knuckle down, and they drove back to Massachusetts, and she enrolled in Columbia to do pre-med, and that kind of stuff bored her too much. She really wanted the excitement. She wanted to be within aviation, to get her intense pleasure out of flying and the thrill and doing what she liked and trying to make money at it.
Now, when she was acting as a nurse's aide, I'm wondering whether she had some like Canadian pilots who had been over in Europe, with doing the dog fights and all of that, and whether that might have had something to do with her, I don't want to say preoccupation with flying, but her wanting to get involved with it from hearing possibly hearing the stories from the pilots who had been over there. Do you think that might have something to do with her?
I think it was from childhood. She was allowed to develop on her own and do whatever she wanted, really. So she developed an interest in it, and I suppose only when flying did she realize how exciting it was. But from everything I read from the reliable biographers, from her own words, intense pleasure was really what exercise, and then this, when flying did what exercise did for her.
So
and
basically,
I think that's what blindsided her, why she never could make any real money in all of this, because she always tended toward the personal thrill rather than knuckling down and making something out of it. She was given many opportunities once she became famous, but she was just very much a dabbler because she lost interest very quickly in things that required, a lot of perseverance.
So she basically,
interest.
Yeah, I was going to say, so it seems like she might have had, been an adrenaline junkie, because I know, today you have people, climbing without ropes and things like that. And the only thing that I can think of is they just need to have that adrenaline rush when they're doing it. It almost sounds like Amelia was kind of the same way. Is that your take on it?
To some extent, but she was too wise to. She was an intelligent woman, and she could be very philosophic, and she was a fatalist. But I wouldn't say she was stupid about stuff. But she certainly didn't prepare as well as she should on a lot of occasions. That is true, but I don't think it was simply because she was eager to get at it, and she was cocky and thought she was going to do all right at it anyway.
Now, did you say that when she was in Long Beach that she kind of got into maybe doing some barnstorming, or did I hear that wrong?
Derby stuff. Those would be the big Derby air races where people would come and watch them, doing spinning around, the ladies walking on the wings, and the pilots, and the biplanes, all that kind of stuff. Jousting, aerial jousting. She did that. That was the big Hollywood thing at the time. All the stars were out there. They all had to learn how to fly. They all had to have a plane. Cecil B. DeMille had his own airport, I think. And that was just the big thing. And that's what got her so much recognition. The downside of that was that she was really not a long-distance flyer. She was not good at navigation yet when she was young, and she didn't have to be. And so she was getting a lot of media attention and setting a few records, like for altitude or for taking a 180-pound man 3,000 feet over Mount Wilson. She got written up for that. But she was basically going to the air shows. And then when that went kaput, when she lost all her money and she had to go to pre-med, she was out of flying for a long time, except she did some things like for Dennison House when she became a social worker in Boston. She got written up for flying the plane and setting out the leaflets announcing, one of their, whatever they were doing, their event. And so she did that, kind of short distance flying. And so when Mrs. Guest, who wanted to back, the friendship flight, the first were the big thing. This was the era of, before reality TV, there were reality stars like this. And to do first made you a reality star, like Admiral Byrd, like Charles Lindbergh, Wiley Post, Will Rogers. This was the era of firsts, of pioneers. And first would have been a woman to fly the Atlantic as a passenger. And Mrs. Guest, who had married a wealthy family in England, she was from Philadelphia, Pittsburgh. Amy Phipps or something of Pittsburgh. She became Mrs. Frederick Guest of London. Mm-hmm. And so she backed the friendship flight. And it was being one of Byrd's old planes, this Fokker trimotor. But her family told her, don't do it. It's too dangerous. And so...
Hey, Jean, can we take a quick break? We'll get back to what you were saying as soon as we get back. But right now we do need to take a station identification break. You're listening to the Full Spectrum Project, and we will be right back with you.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, Birmingham, Alabama.
And we are back, and we are going to be bringing in Angie Mole. Pete, if you would like to introduce her.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's get ready to get spooky again. Angie Mole and the Weird World News.
Hey, y'all.
Hi, Angie.
All right, I've been really enjoying this because, as a woman who has always been interested in male-dominated stuff, whether it's, the firearms and target shooting or hunting or my, racing cars. Even when I was, working in a mechanic shop and I was rebuilding motors and all of that, so I get Amelia. I get her. So I'm enjoying hearing about her and what she's done and all of that because I think she's cool.
She was definitely a pioneer.
Yes.
Okay. Well, a little bit of some silliness, I guess.
From you, never.
We can use silliness.
I know, right? I'm usually so incredibly serious and
always.
Olten is a town in Switzerland and home to a Lindt chocolate factory.
Well, you're starting off really well now. Chocolate's always good.
Wait a minute.
Exactly.
Why would they want to have chocolate flavored Lindt?
Because
just be quiet.
It makes laundry fun.
And
I'll be quiet.
Thank you.
Did you sharpen the stick, Angie?
No, but my sharpener's right here.
Okay. All right. Good.
In a crazy fantasy turned reality, the ventilation system in the factory malfunctioned and released cocoa into the air, lightly dusting the area surrounding the factory with a light layer of cocoa powder. The residents seemed pretty excited about it, although it probably wouldn't taste very good. If you've ever had plain cocoa powder, you know exactly what I'm talking about, how chalky and nasty it is without the sugar.
Mm-hmm.
But that's actually probably good considering it got all over objects and cars in the town. There were pictures on Twitter that showed, the hoods of cars that had the cocoa on them. And the Lindt Corporation did offer to clean everything, although no one has taken them up on it. I'm wondering if they're harvesting all of the cocoa powder for their baking needs.
All they got to do is walk down the street with a big fan and it's done.
That is so disgusting. I was picturing these people outside, like when it snows with their tongues out,
Well, how about cocoa fights instead of snowball fights? Cocoa snowmen.
And you guys talk about me. Wow.
Well, we talk about you all the time.
We try not to, but
it always creeps in. Always.
Okay, so the asteroid named 2020 QG came within 1,800 miles of the Earth a few days ago. Mm-hmm. Did you hear about that?
No.
Yeah, I didn't either. What bugged me about the whole situation is that it was not spotted until that very day.
Oh, okay. Well, that would explain some of the pictures I saw look like something on fire dropping through the sky.
Now, it was only a few meters in diameter, and it wouldn't have caused much damage if it had entered our atmosphere, but it would be more comforting to know that people had ID'd it prior to the flyby. So
yeah.
They kind of would have been like, oh, there's an asteroid kind of maybe headed this way, and, maybe in a couple of days we should worry about it. I know that it was small, so they weren't concerned. I get that.
So we're not looking at something else like Tunguska or something like
that. Who can you trust? I don't know. I can't give you the answer on that.
Okay. Well, you can. We're friends.
Honestly, I would imagine that if something like that were to happen, nobody would open their mouths at all.
Oh, okay.
We wouldn't have toilet paper until we all just went up in flames. So,
you can't find toilet paper now because of the pandemic. So
yeah, well, maybe where you live, our people came, to their senses a while back.
I'm in California. We don't have senses out here.
Exactly. We're aware.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we talk about it all the time.
So Germany is trying to pass some pretty strict laws regarding dog ownership, and here's what they proposed: 2 walks per day, totaling at least an hour. No dogs chained for periods of time. No more than 3 litters at a time residing in a breeder's home, and all must have 4 hours of human interaction a day. Dogs not being left alone the whole day.
I don't see a problem with that, actually.
Well, okay. So me, and you and I are both all about the dog rescue thing.
Yeah.
And, I've fought pet stores and puppy mills and all of that for a long time.
Yeah.
I
remember a few fights.
I just.
I don't think they could. I don't think you're even allowed on the parking lot anymore. I think I want them.
No.
Yeah.
No. Petland is a dirty word.
That's the one.
Now, a spokesman did say that the law revision is aimed at puppy mills and kennels. It will be up to the individual states to actually enforce the laws, but regular citizens would not be getting home visits asking about daily walks. But I'm just
trying. So they're going to make the laws, but they're not going to enforce
it. Very American of them.
Oh, what's the point?
I guess like the person said was to more or less be cracking down on the puppy mills and the kennels, which, I'm never going to complain about. But I don't
disagree with that either.
I'm sorry?
I say I don't disagree with that either. It just seems like it would be something that you would have to enforce to make sure that it's not happening, instead of just giving a law and saying, okay, well, abide by this. Well, a lot of those folks don't even abide by regular standards. I don't know.
Right. Well, the good news is that Germany is much better off than France, and we're not going to talk about France and them abandoning pets every year around the summer, because that just enrages me. But yeah, so at first, when I first read it, I was picturing people like having to keep logs of like their daily walks with Fido and whatnot, and it just really cracked me up. And another thing,
kind of like unemployment. You have to keep a log, so if they call for it, you have to send it in.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yes, sir.
We're auditing walkies. I'm going to need you to email that in. Yeah, but they're also talking about trying to change so that the dog shows and the kennel clubs would not allow dogs with cropped ears and docked tails to perform in the shows, even though that's the breed standard. Like for Doberman.
But I mean that's I know, but I mean that's a standard because of when they were originally working, because it's for reasons, but not now. I mean, not as pets. I mean, what's the point?
Well, I have a very strict no tails in the house policy. I have never owned a dog with a tail, and I have never had things fly off my coffee table.
Okay.
And it's so cute because they get excited and their whole butt wiggles.
Well, you should have a Great Dane when he gets excited. Then he just clears off tables and chairs and opens doors and stuff.
I do not exude horse energy. No.
Well, I'm going to go down to your house. You can get some of that horse energy.
And this is probably my favorite article that I have read in the last week. And Brock's has released a new flavor of candy corn just in time for the fall season. Actually, it's several flavors combined in a single bag. The individual corns are actually different flavors. And the bag...
kind of like Jelly Bellies?
Yes. Yeah, exactly like that. In fact, the bag as a collection is called Turkey Dinner. And it includes candy corn flavored as roasted turkey, green beans, cranberry sauce, glazed carrots, sweet potato pie, and stuffing of individual candy corn pieces.
No way.
I swear. Candy corn is kind of like the cilantro of candy. Either you love it or you hate it. It is so polarized, and there is no way this particular, collection of flavors is going to win over any new fans.
I was going to say, I just went from loving candy corn to hating it just with that story.
Let me tell you something, okay? So it says that it's already stocked in Walgreens stores, And as soon as I read this article today, I went to Walgreens and I was like practically assaulting one of the customer service people because I was like, I have got to find one of these bags of turkey dinner candy corn. And the woman was like, are you kidding me? I don't want to see that. We have boxes of Halloween candy we haven't unboxed yet. She said, you're telling me that we're supposed to have some of that? I'm like, yeah.
I could just see them calling security because they have some strange person that's probably on meth that's wanting stuff and escorting you out.
Well, she told me that there are 2 Walgreens that are close to me. And so the one that I went to that's actually the closest, she said that it would probably be another week before they got around to unboxing all of the Halloween candy. So after the show tonight, I'm going to go to the other one and see if they have it because your girl wants some glazed carrot candy corn.
Oh my God. And I had mentioned to you too about the pickle beer. So are you going to be eating those the candy corn turkey dinner with pickle beer?
Pete, did you read my script? Did you read my script? I'm not even kidding you. At the bottom it says, at the bottom of what I wrote, that's where I'm headed after tonight's show. I may stop by the grocery store and pick up some pickle beer while I'm at it.
No, I did not. I just remember our conversation.
Hey, here's something for you guys. I don't ever want to hear you complain about Californians and tofu ever again.
Hey, you've never heard me complain about it because I like tofu.
Yeah, well, you're just weird.
Especially with a
you want pickle beer. Oh, just no.
Oh, I can see you turning green. It's great.
Yeah, kind of.
And that is all I've got for y'all today.
Oh, thank God.
You are listening to WBHM-DB, Birmingham, Alabama.
Okay, so we're going to get started again with the Full Spectrum Project with Gian J. Quasar. But before we get started, Pete, you remember what I do for a living, correct? My day job?
Yeah, you shovel bear stuff out of cages, right?
Close. I work asphalt.
That's about the same thing.
About the same thing, yeah. Hot black is, well,
Yeah, it's about the same thing.
So I actually got some good news today, which
good.
I thought was kind of cool.
It's about time.
Yeah, a few years ago, a buddy of mine was at work. He had this really bad accident, and he actually ended up having to have a hook put on the end of his arm. Right?
Oh, God, and you get the stick.
No.
Why?
No.
Why?
No.
Come on, guys. I'm trying to tell you a good thing here about a friend of mine, and this is how you're going to be. Really? Anyway, so he finally decided that he was going to get a prosthetic to replace the hook, and so to save money, he actually picked it up at the secondhand store, which I thought was really cool.
Where's that hook?
Okay,
Angie, where's that hook?
On the Full Spectrum Project Facebook page, there will be a link to a petition to get Brian Plume to stop.
It's not going to happen. You know that as well as I do. It's not going to happen.
What?
Oh, God.
What's wrong? I just
John, I seriously, I apologize for the last joke that you heard. They do get better, but he tends to get people to write for him that will work for food. So this is about as good as it gets.
No, you see, this is what happens when you give them turkey candy corn and pickle beer. This is what you get.
I haven't had any yet. I am so excited, though.
Yeah, no comment.
Hey, Brian?
Yes?
Right. Let's start it up again. I want to hear more about Amelia Earhart.
Okay.
While I get this taste out of my mouth from hooks.
Okay, we can do that.
Okay.
All right, so John, one of the things that I thought was kind of interesting, after Amelia Earhart moved back to Massachusetts, and you were kind of talking about how they wanted to have a female fly across the Atlantic as a passenger. Mm-hmm. And I had kind of heard that Amelia Earhart was chosen not necessarily because of her flying ability, but because she bore a resemblance to Charles Lindbergh. Did you hear about that? And do you think there's any truth in that?
Yes, that's explicitly expressed by Colonel Harold Rayleigh, who was the publicist in charge of it. He noticed how she looked like Lindbergh, who was the most popular man in the world, or if not, well, yeah, in America at least. And she had a very shy demeanor like he had, and that's basically what clinched it, because she was going to go as a passenger. Her flying skills were really not relevant. And Mrs. Guest wanted someone who was very morally, proper and so forth. And so that was Amelia Earhart. And so from a publicist's point of view at that time, she was perfect. And then she was taken off to New York, and G.P. Putnam really liked her, and she was in.
Yeah, I just think it's kind of funny that maybe it's just because of the era, and the flight was so still new, basically. But it just seems kind of interesting to me that somebody who was a passenger would get the kind of fame that she did when she actually didn't do anything but sit and look out a window.
Yeah, she called herself a bag of potatoes.
Oh, did she?
Therein comes the power of Amelia Earhart. She was that charismatic. She was that charming. So when she smiled and waved in England, people just fell apart. She was the big angle of the flight anyway. Men had flown over the Atlantic already now since Lindbergh's time. There was no big deal to that. But she, as the first woman passenger to fly the Atlantic, was the first for the flight. It had no promotional value, other than that she was there aboard. And so she was catered to, and it was a secret, that she was going to be going on the flight. So no one would jump the claim and put a woman on their flight and then beat them. But she really charmed everybody. She got to meet the Prince of Wales and Lady Astor and all sorts of things. And she was quoted in all the British papers. And with the money she would get for the flight, she bought her first airplane. Well, not her first, but her first new one ever. For years, she had not flown. As I said, she lost her money and had to move back east. And so she bought Lady Mary Heath's old plane that she had flown from Johannesburg, I believe, in South Africa to London, so a 12,000-mile flight. And she figured that must be a good plane, so she bought it. She hung it on a hook on the Roosevelt, the ship that brought them back. And she was greeted as this great celebrity coming back to New York. And that's when Putnam helped getting her promotion, and she was offered two jobs, two editorial jobs. She took the one at Cosmo. And McCall's, I think, was the other one that offered her a job, but then she endorsed cigarettes even though she didn't smoke, and McCall's withdrew the job offer because they didn't approve of women smoking. And her fame continued to build up from there. She wrote her articles. She'd be the aviation editor, and she would encourage both men and women. She was a promotional speaker with her charisma. And so she endorsed this and that, and Amelia Earhart's face was on, all the different kind of products. And that was her basis in fame. But in America, of course, she was touted as America's premier aviatrix. And that was not true. She had not flown long distances. She wasn't very good at navigation. She hadn't flown consistency for several years because she didn't have the money. Mm-hmm. And the newspapers had to dig up that she had once been somebody in L.A., at the Derby scene. And it set a record in 1922 for altitude. Can't even find the exact date for that. It was the winter of 1922. And that was the big catch-22, is that now she had to prove she was the premier aviatrix, and she couldn't fly that well. She was a mediocre flyer.
Right.
And people have used that. They have cropped that image with time to try and, soil her reputation and say that that's why she disappeared in the Atlantic. In the Pacific, she was not a very good pilot. By that time, she was a very good pilot. But she did have to go through a long period of, frankly, learning how to fly much better airplanes than these, cheap little paper biplanes that she had been flying. And she didn't push herself very much for a long time. She liked her new fame with George Putnam catering to her. She wrote the book, 20 hours and 40 minutes, which was the amount of time they were in the air. She was a celebrity. She was a Cosmo editor influencing people at the time. And she didn't do much toward progressing flying.
At least,
if you look at it critically, go ahead.
No, I was going to say at least until a little bit later, which we will get back to. But unfortunately, we have to take another station identification break. But we will get back in just a minute to delve in a little bit deeper into Amelia Earhart.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, Birmingham, Alabama.
Thank you for listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. The time is 23 minutes after the hour.
And we are back with the Full Spectrum Project, and we are speaking to Gian J. Quasar. So, John, we were talking about how Amelia had become famous, but she really hadn't done a whole lot. And I think it was, if I remember correctly, 4 years after she was a passenger, and in 1932, that she made the first solo flight across the Atlantic, or was the first female. Would this be the start of where her true fame came in?
Yes, that's when she felt she deserved her fame, because she really did this, and she took, frankly, a little too long to do it. The rumors were that Eleanor Smith was going to do it, and Eleanor Smith probably was the best female pilot in America. And another pilot had a female pilot, what was her name? Rose. I forget now the last name. She had cracked up landing up in St. John's to do the jump off, and that's what alerted, everybody that there was a woman trying to do this. So that sent some shocks toward Amelia's way. If she was upped on this, she would be pretty much relegated to obscurity, because she hadn't done much of anything. She did a couple of cross-country flying things, that stupid auto gyro, and she didn't do well at all of them, because her navigation is really not that great. So the powder puff derby, I forget when that was, but the big thing where there was a first was flying across the Atlantic, and she basically took off with the shirt on her back, because she didn't want anybody to find out. And that's how it was for everybody back then. They hid their firsts, because that's where the endorsement was from doing the first. So a couple of pilots flew her up to St. John, and she took off from there on her own, and she was going to go to Paris, but she kind of fouled up and was lucky to get to Ireland. Her plane started cutting out and everything, but she did the Atlantic.
So were you saying that she kind of was trying to keep that whole flight at the time kind of hush-hush? She didn't want people to know she was doing it?
Oh, yes. Until she took off. Yes, everybody did that who was going to do it first. Admiral Byrd would engage in lots of, diversionary and disinformation to protect his new expeditions. That was commonplace for everybody. Because someone hear you're going to do it, they'll jump your claim.
Oh, so okay, I see. So she was afraid.
Everybody had to do that.
Gotcha. So she was afraid that if she told people she was going to do it, somebody would beat her to it.
Oh, yes, absolutely. That's why she was didn't make up her mind until that very day. She was taken to the airport, and she would not even be seen to have a second pair of clothes or anything. Maybe she had a sandwich aboard or something like that. And she flew off with these guys. They took her to St. John's, and from there she flew off with the clothes with her and a pair of shoes. That was it.
Gotcha.
And a full tank of gas. And she made Ireland, which was not what she intended, but the response, of course, was enormous, both in Europe again. And she came back, and her famous speech about that it's going to be commonplace, to have transatlantic flight in her lifetime, and she wanted to be a part of it. She was eyeing herself as a future in the airlines that were budding. And I think that was partially a mistake. That's what kept her doing really kind of inconsequential flights that she got an awful lot of publicity for, but they weren't preparing her for a truly long flight. There were such derbies in the world, races like from London to Melbourne. She was not a part of that. That's, around the world. And Lady Mary, who she bought her first plane from, of course, had flown in the 1920s from all over Africa, across the Mediterranean, Europe, and into London. She did that back and forth. So now, toward the mid-30s, Amelia Earhart really had just the Atlantic run underneath her, and she didn't even make Paris. She had to go down in Ireland. She was off course. And so then she is enjoying that for a while. And because she was so involved in the airlines with Jean Dahl and Putnam and all the others, she started doing flights that really would promote upcoming airline traffic routes. And so her and George, they were now married, and they put her new plane, her Vega, on the ship, and they cruised to the Hawaiian Islands, and that was to be another big flight. She said she denied it, of course, because that's what she did. They were fed all of the Hawaiian Islands, and they even asked her, why'd you bring a plane? She said, she might want to do some flying around the islands. And then someone said, well, why would you fly from Hawaii to California? And she said, because it's easier to hit a continent than an island. And for her navigation at the time, that was certainly true. And so but she still hit it, and then they realized she was going to do it, and she took off, and they had all this flash radio announcements. George Putnam made sure he got on the air, and she spoke from her phone that she had just taken off, and this big fanfare. And she did finally nail her navigation. Hours and hours later, she overflew a cruise ship and realized she was on course, and she got into Oakland on time, and an enormous reception. You can see the film footage of her landing in Oakland. And then that really catapulted her, and she got her confidence with that because she hit her mark. And then she did Mexico City, big plan. George Putnam had it, with stamps and everything, so they would make their money out of this. She took off from Mexico City to New Jersey, to Teterboro Airport, because that's what serviced New York. So this was, of course, what was this suggesting? This was another airline route. And these flights, as significant as they were and gave her all this attention, really did not prepare her for long-range navigation. But she was tired of the stunt flights. She had told Harold Rayleigh that. She had done a couple of cross-country speed set records in the United States. But now she opts for the around-the-world flight. And she told people this was going to be her last flight. She really wanted to get into making money at something. She wasn't making it like she thought she should have been. The airline stuff wasn't panning out because, frankly, she was a dabbler. She liked her excitement and couldn't do well at a desk at an airline. And so that's why she had, what I would say, promoted the airline routes, because she liked doing that. She liked her flying. But now she wanted the around-the-world flight, and that was, of course, a big announcement. You can see video of her probably on YouTube. I'm not sure if I've seen it there, but I've seen it on old documentaries where she's announcing to the people and showing where her stops are going to be on the globe as she spins it. Big, big deal. And so she takes off and then crashes, in Hawaii. And the Electra has to be fixed, her new plane that she was given by the Purdue University.
So that's the first if I remember
correctly,
for her. Yeah, because we kind of talked about it earlier, where Amelia and Noonan were planning on heading westbound instead. Is that what we're talking about here? And they actually crashed in Hawaii?
She was going to go to Howland. Right. So from Hawaii, she was going to go to Howland, and she would have had enough fuel to play with going that direction. And with him as a navigator, an expert navigator, she would have made Howland. And then the rest was basically something that they could have pulled off going the other way. But she wrecked the plane on takeoff. Wrecked the undercarriage. It had to be taken back to Lockheed in Los Angeles, all this preparation done. And then it was decided that she's going to go the other way. It's hard really to say when the flight began. There's contradiction if it began at Miami. As far as the newspapers are concerned, her around the world flight began at Miami. But she says it began at Oakland, and that's where it was to end. But basically, she flew back and forth from Lockheed to Oakland and then back down and quietly across the country, and the plane was fine. And George had to get out at Miami and everybody else, and her and Noonan then took off from Miami. And the papers graded that as the beginning of the around-the-world flight, when quietly it had actually been from Oakland. However you want to play with it. There's a little confusion there because of the stinging publicity from wrecking last time. So the flight went fairly well. She crossed the Atlantic at the narrow point from Pernambuco area and came in the coast wrong because she disagreed with Noonan. She admitted that. She had a clipboard, she was writing updates, and she was giving these to Putnam back in America because they're writing a book, another way to make money off of this. And he would publish that as last flight after she was gone. And so the flight around the world went pretty well. And at Lae, New Guinea, they're delayed a bit, and she's perfectly fueled up finally. They dumped some extra equipment they should not have dumped, has to do with radio. Then finally, fully loaded, she finally takes off. It was July 1, July 2, the date line I forget. I think it was July 1, then it would become July 2, and then it became July 2 again, whatever, as she crossed the date line, but took off for Howland Island. Now, this was the longest and most dangerous leg. And fuel-wise, she wouldn't have much to spare. And this is when the problems begin.
Just out of curiosity, during the flight before they arrived in Lae, New Guinea, did they have any kind of weather or any kind of, during takeoffs or landings that could have possibly damaged the aircraft? In a way that
the monsoon, that there was the weather in was it Burma, India, somewhere she had to turn back. They couldn't make it, and they had to wait it out. That would not be the problem. What someone had discovered in the past few years, I can't remember his name. It's in the book. Off the top of my head, I can't remember it. Is that looking at the film of her taking off in Lae, New Guinea, there's dust that suddenly shoots up by the airplane. And I guess no one noticed it. And he said her antenna, which is underneath the airplane,
right,
snapped off, and that's probably why she could not ever pick up radio communication from the Itasca at Howland Island. Now that could be true because she had she was not responding to their messages. They were getting frustrated, and she was coming in louder, and still. She was getting more excited to hear, Captain Thompson was defending himself later in a letter to his superiors. He was quite upset by all this because, of course, a lot of blame fell on him because he was in charge. He was the captain of the Itasca, and he was supposed to stand by the island as the watch ship. But she was not responding to what they were telling her to do. She was asking them to take a bearing on her. She would whistle or speak, da-da-da, so they could take a bearing. But she would not last on the radio longer than 8 seconds. And that was phenomenal to Thompson and the radio operator as to why this supposedly expert pilot doesn't realize how long she has to remain on the radio for them to get a fix. But I was going to say, so she may have thought
or she may have actually been on the radio longer, but because the antenna was damaged or broken off, it wasn't broadcasting the entire time.
No, the transmitting antenna was on top. That was fine. That was her receiving antenna on the bottom.
Oh.
They were picking her up, but she was apparently not picking them up, and that was getting frustrating. And if, it's when I start dividing bone and marrow here now. If her antenna was intact on the bottom, there would not have been a problem, I'm saying, because they would have finally said, you have to stay on longer so we can pick up your message and get a bearing on you, and she would have done so. But as it turned out, according to Thompson, she was getting so excited it was near hysterical, and I think he was exaggerating. But it is true that she was not on the radio longer than 8 seconds, and that's what he was saying to his superiors, that they could not do anything about it. And apparently it was completely believed by Morgenthau, because he thought if the entire transcript was made public, he told Eleanor Roosevelt this, that Amelia Earhart's reputation would be shot. And, not staying on the radio longer than 8 seconds does reflect a certain amount of ignorance as to how a bearing is taken on a pilot speaking into the mic, or, just going da-da-da-da-da, or whistling. She would do either so they could pick her up.
Well, now, is that something that Noonan should have known as well? That she needed
Noonan
to broadcast?
wasn't even near the radio. He was in the back taking the celestial readout, so he was not even near the radio.
Okay.
So it's hard to say, is it complete ignorance on her part, or the fact that she's not picking anything up from them? It was hard to ever say whether she picked up until she, very close, she might have been able to pick up something, but she was coming in louder steadily until it was obvious she was close to the island, and then she faded a bit, and Thompson assumed that she passed the island. And they waited a while, and that's when he up-anchored and started looking to the north, figured that she passed by and went to the north.
Well, so I have a question about that. So the trip from Leh to Howland Island, if I remember correctly, was approximately 2,700 miles. Excuse me. With the Lockheed Electra, was it
2,500 or something?
2,500.
So she had fuel for like 2,500 and something miles.
Okay, so it was a just gonna make it kind of leg of the trip.
Yeah, like 45 minutes to spare, something like that.
Okay, now I had heard that there was a possibility that they had possibly run into some storm clouds or something that she needed to climb above, and that could have used up more fuel than they expected. So instead of actually going past Howland, they might not have actually reached Howland because of that. What do you have an idea about that?
Or if they had encountered greater headwinds, then that would have eaten up more fuel and brought her down short of it. The problem with that is that she came in really loud at one point and then began to fade again. So where was she? Was she passing the island? In what direction? That is the debate, because they were on a line going north and south now, trying to find the island along this line, this sun line of 337,157 degrees. But they didn't know if she was going north or south at the present time, and that's what confuses everything. Did she go down south of the island? Did she go down north? And Thompson had to make the call based on the information and said she went down north, and that's when the Itasca up-anchored and went that way.
Now, do you think that if the Itasca had not weighed anchor and headed out, that might have made a difference in everything?
No, because they waited, for a while after she was down, after they knew fuel exhaustion had occurred, so there was no point in remaining there.
So when they weighed anchor, were they out looking for the wreckage, or were they thinking that maybe she had made it to one of the islands? What was the whole...
Well, there was no other island around there. There's Baker Island to the south, but that was smaller than Howland and had no airfield. This was a little spit of land in the middle of nowhere. And so there was always confused information whether that plane would float with its tanks empty. It was the plane was adjusted. Its entire body was basically a gas tank, and when those are empty, there'd be buoyancy to it. But there was some problem if she ditched properly. The valves for those gas tanks could have been broken and they would have flooded with water and she wouldn't be floating. And then they believed she could transmit at sea while floating, and then someone said no, she couldn't. She'd have to be on land with one of her motors turning over in order to generate the radio. So they were following up on, reports of people claiming they heard her and giving coordinates until it was finally settled that she, could not be transmitting unless she was on land.
Yeah, I was just going to ask.
Which inspires others to believe that she was on Nikumaroro, or that she was in the Marshall Islands, or that she did go back to the Gilbert Islands or drifted there. And some of these messages could then be true.
Yeah, I was going to ask you if there was any ham operators that had heard any distress calls or amateur radio.
There were those who claimed they were hearing messages on the West Coast, and that's why Coast Guard thought they were all faked, because these were from cranks. On the West Coast, there were people in Kentucky or something who picked up a message and insisted it was her, that she was on a small island. They could see a larger island, and describing the weather, and that Captain Noonan is hurt, and all this. And George Putnam kind of irked Jackie Cochran, who was another great female pilot at the time, but was very close with Amelia Earhart. Jackie Cochran was married to Odom. He owned RKO Pictures. And so they stayed together before, and Jackie Cochran was a firm believer in her psychic powers. And so in her book, Stars at Noon, her autobiography, she talked about how she had agreed with Amelia Earhart that she would try and find her psychically if she went down, and Amelia agreed. Yeah. And so George kind of made fun of that, which made Cochran like him even less. Most people didn't like George anyway. They liked Amelia. She was the one who was loved. So George burst in, according to Jackie Cochran, George burst in and wanted to know if she could find Amelia psychically, and she said she'd try. And she wrote in her book that she gave the coordinates to George as she saw a ship named Itasca. She had never heard of it. She saw a Japanese fishing vessel or something like that, and she couldn't remember the name. And she gave the coordinates that Amelia was drifting, and in a couple of days after she gave George this, she went and lit a candle at the church because Amelia had succumbed.
Wow.
And the way to verify this, interestingly, is that I did look at all the preserved Navy papers and the Coast Guard papers. And George Putnam did come into the station in Oakland, or radioed them, and said, could you look in this coordinates? And he gave the coordinates. And there's no excuse given why he even asked them to look in this location. And I have to assume that those are the coordinates that Jackie Cochran gave him. And it's interesting that this is way west of the Gilbert Islands. And so she believed psychically that Amelia was at this location just above the equator, around 170 degrees east.
Interesting. All right. Well, we have to take another station identification break. When we come back, we will continue speaking about Amelia Earhart and her mysterious disappearance with Gian J. Quasar. So we'll see you on the flip side.
You're listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experience Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
Oh, come on. I'm Southern, but... Nope. That'll do. Hello. I am Kat Hobson, host of Paranormal Experience here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting out of Birmingham, Alabama. I enjoy having guests from all areas of the paranormal, from ghosts to ufology to cryptids and beyond. You'll find some of the best researchers in their fields bringing you some great information. Join me on Wednesday nights from 8 to 10 p. Eastern here on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
Since 1948, Fate magazine has brought you reports of the strange and unknown, all of them true. Fate Radio is carrying on that tradition, bringing you the unusual, macabre, strange, and bizarre. Join host Kat Hobson Sunday nights from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern on WBHM Digital Broadcasting.
You're listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk, only on Paranormal Experienced Radio, broadcasting live out of Birmingham, Alabama.
And we're back on the Full Spectrum Project. We have been talking with Gian J. Quasar about Amelia Earhart. And we were just kind of talking about what may have happened as far as her, flying past the island or getting close to one of the other islands by way of, I guess, floating if she had ditched the aircraft. How far is Nika Mororu from where her destination was supposed to be with Howland Island?
Hundreds of miles.
And I was going to say also, after you answered that, could you get a little bit more into, did they ever go and look at those coordinates that you had mentioned before the break?
I wrote about it. I should remember that, but I'm not sure if they acted upon it because nothing was around there. It's quite far west of the Gilbert Islands, but they're assuming some kind of drift. I guess they didn't know why he was asking. See, I have to make the deduction that he's responding to Jackie Cochran.
Okay.
And the thing is, this was, I think, July 17th, so this was she remembered it being just a few days after and that he burst in, but her memory was faulty. So this was actually a couple of weeks after that she believed that Amelia Earhart was still drifting for 2 weeks and had drifted west of the Gilberts. So you have to put it all together to find out, what their memories were like. But it is true that those coordinates were sent by George for no reason that they could determine.
Oh, okay.
And that would be a long way. She'd have to have drifted past the Gilbert Islands. But as for Nicamororo or Gardner Island, it was along the line of 157337. That's why those who base their theories on Gilbert Island say that she continued south along that sun line and ended up ditching at Nicamororo. How she had fuel to get there, I really don't know. That's always
We have had a momentary problem due to lightning. We will be right back just as quickly as we can. Thank you. Sis We are back. Sorry for that delay. This recording will be edited for clarity and no breaks. So let's get back. This is going to be awesome.
Okay, so John, go ahead and continue with what you were saying about
the compromise is that in going south on 157, she did come across Winslow Reef, and since this was visible at low tide, just a sand spit, and it was mischarted, the Colorado tried to find it and couldn't. So that's really everybody's out, that she ditched on Winslow Reef and then was picked up, according to Fred Gerner, then was picked up weeks later by a Japanese ship and taken to the Marshall Islands and there to Saipan. That's how he continues to work it. But
there's really no evidence that actually happened. Okay, so it's just a theory, basically.
They backwork it because they believe she was on Saipan and the Marshall Islands. They have all these natives testifying so she had to get there somehow. And she didn't sink at sea, and she didn't go down. She couldn't reach the Marshall Islands, and she couldn't reach Gardner Island. So this is the compromise. Because Gardner Island was aerial searched a week after. There was no one there. Regardless of what is said today, to maintain that theory, Lambrecht and his crew, they came down 400 feet. They scanned over the island. There was no plane wreck. There was no one there.
And how close is Gardner to Nicomaroro?
Gardner is Nicomaroro.
Okay, that's why I was wondering whether it was the same one. Now,
Winslow Reef was far to the north, so maybe they think she made it there. No one could find Winslow Reef, and so eventually the Japanese came and found her and took her to Marshall Islands, a Japanese fishing boat, weeks later.
Now, I had heard that there were some shoes that were found. There's a little bit of a disparity, though. Yeah, because I guess Earhart wore size 6, and the shoes they found were size 9, but they're saying that they were the same style and they looked exactly the same as what Earhart was wearing in a picture from when she was getting into the Electra. What do you know about that?
How common were women's Oxford shoes back then?
I have no clue.
So, that there was a colony on there afterward, 1940, so they were going to find stuff from that period.
Okay.
So that really doesn't help. There was the story afterward, a guy in New York, Madman Rothar, had caused all this commotion in the press when he said, as a member of a ship crew, they saw this woman naked except for a pair of athletic shorts calling out for help from this island, and there was a plane wreck in a lagoon, and a guy's body was half-eaten and hanging over the wing, and so people believe this was Earhart, that he was talking about this, and George Putnam and even Jean Vidal apparently believe that this could be true, because, as I said, the witness said that this woman was only wearing a pair of man's athletic shorts, and no one knew that she actually wore men's athletic shorts when she was flying because they were more comfortable. So how did Madman Rothar know this? Because he was a complete scam. He tried to blackmail, extort $2,000 out of George Putnam and went to the nut house for it. This was a month after she had vanished, and it was never really followed through how he could have known all this stuff. He was certainly not in the Pacific at the time. He was a janitor in New York. Stuff like that happened that has to be sorted out a little more clearly, coincidences like that.
I was going to say, that is a pretty compelling coincidence.
And many things like that occurred, and you really can't say they're evidence. When you see someone say they found a pair of shoes that look similar to hers but a different size, what is that really worth? Does that really identify? And when you have the pilot of the search aircraft who overflew that island a week after she was gone, no one was there. They would not have died within a week, and he would have seen the wreck off the coast.
Right.
But now that's reported.
One of the biggest, I guess you could call it a conspiracy theory, is that the U.S. government had asked Amelia Earhart and Noonan to spy on the Japanese. I mean, I think everybody has heard this theory. My question would be, though, is because of when it was, we were still trying to negotiate with Japan. What would be the reason that the United States would ask, especially somebody as famous as Amelia Earhart and on such a historic flight, to do something like that? And where did this theory originate?
It would have been to fly over and take pictures of how they were fortifying the islands. And I think it originated pretty early as a means of explaining. There was always some kind of rumor she was on doing more than just flying, and that Roosevelt wasn't building an airfield out there on Little Remote Howland just for her, that he had other plans. The problem is that her flight schedule would have taken her over. Well, she could not have reached the Marshall Islands and Howland Island in one flight. And so then the conspiracy theory is that she had a different plane, really, and that she had more gas than they knew. But the truth is that however you cut it, from her flight pattern, she would have been over the Marshall Islands at nighttime, and nighttime photography and spying is impossible back then. That did not come about until World War II with photo bombing, when they dropped basically huge light bulbs. They exploded on the ground, big burst of light, and then the guy overhead in the bomber took pictures, and that's what they would examine. And so there was no way she could have done anything. It was impossible. Gerner really popularized that she was on a spy mission until eventually it was shown that she didn't have the fuel and that she would have been there overnight, which would have meant nothing. She could not have seen anything in 1937.
Yeah, it seems kind of interesting, too. You had mentioned that there's a theory that she was in a different aircraft. Are you trying to say that people believe that they weren't actually flying in a Lockheed Electra, but in another longer range type of aircraft?
But a higher model, a juiced up model that had a higher range and greater speed, that when she wrecked the old one, the changes were being made, that they got this new one for her instead and painted up to look like the other one. And then the spy mission was commissioned and cameras were put in the nose of the plane and all this kind of stuff. And there's just nothing. If she was spying on that flight, it certainly wasn't on the Japanese. She might have been marking positions over Africa, over wherever. I don't know if she did something on the side, but her flight plan did not allow her to even see the Marshall Islands because they would have been there at night.
Now, if that whole thing had occurred, would that have been a reason, say, for her to have been executed while on Saipan?
No, because the governor didn't have any authority.
Well, if Japan had gotten wind of her spying, is it feasible that they might have given the governor permission?
Not with the emperor's brother interested in seeing her. No. Now, if she had died naturally, and they did get the Electra, as is the legend, and this was a fancy new aircraft, they would have wanted to keep the aircraft, so maybe that's why they kept quiet. But they would never have killed her. But she might have died from exposure a few days later, and then they didn't know what to do. They wanted to keep the plane.
So, what is your theory about what had happened?
I don't give my theory because I don't have one. That I try and explain everything logically and give people their chance to springboard from there. But I will mention the Winslow Reef. If everything is correct on Saipan, then the only compromise is Winslow Reef or drifting at sea.
Okay.
And then you can fit the rest in, that she was taken to the Marshall Islands, that she was taken to Saipan.
Gotcha. Okay.
And that logically she died, but she would not have been executed.
Okay.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Well, unfortunately, we are out of time, but I just wanted to say thank you because I've really been interested in the whole conspiracy and everything regarding Amelia Earhart and never, really delved into it myself. So I was just thrilled when Pete said that you were going to be on our show tonight. But I just want to say thank you so much, John. It was absolutely fascinating.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
We'd like to have you on again, so we can discuss many of your other works, if you're good with that.
Anytime.
Awesome. Thank you, John.
I look forward to it. Okay, so folks, next week we are going to be joined by Butch Witkowski, and he is a UFO researcher and director of the UFO Research Center of Pennsylvania. So I'm looking forward to that. We have not discussed ufology on the show, at least not much. So I hope you can join us next week. It ought to be a great show. Until then, I'm Brian Clune saying thank you. Pete?
And I'm Pete Haviland saying thank you all for coming in. And Miss Angie?
And I'm Angie.
And I'm Angie.
All right. We will see you next week. Thank you so much.
You are listening to WBHM Digital Broadcasting, the best in paranormal talk radio.